Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you from my living room for another virtual event. We're so excited tonight to have Wendy Walker here with us. Her newest book, Don't Look for Me, just came out. And we're joined by Aimee Malloy, whose book, Good Night Beautiful, is actually out on October 13th. So you've got time to pre-order it now. In case you guys are unfamiliar with them, Wendy Walker is the author of the psychological suspense novels All Is Not Forgotten, Emma in the Night Before, and Don't Look for Me. Her novels have been translated into 23 foreign languages and have topped bestseller lists both nationally and abroad. They've been featured on The Today Show, the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, and the Book of the Month Club, and have been optioned for television and film. Wendy is currently finishing her next thriller and managing a busy household in Connecticut. Aimee is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Perfect Mother, her debut novel. She has also co-authored several nonfiction books, including However Long the Night, Molly Melching's Journey to Help Millions of African Women, and Girls Triumph. She lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 2 daughters. How are y'all this evening?
Hi.
Good, really good.
So to get us started, if you guys are watching live on Facebook, if you have questions for either author, you can drop those in the chat. I'll be monitoring those so I can pass those along after we've had time to chat. But Wendy, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the new book?
Absolutely. So Don't Look for Me is the story of Molly Clark. She's a wife and mother who disappears in a small town far from home. And everyone comes to believe that she has walked away from her life. There are a lot of reasons that support that theory, including some physical evidence and a really, tragic backstory in her family. And it's the anniversary of that. And other reasons. There's a storm. So 2 weeks later, though, her daughter gets a new lead. Her daughter's 21, and she decides to go back to this very small, insular, economically depressed town and look for her mother at all cost. And it's told with a split time frame and 2 narrations. So you're with Molly moment by moment from the night she disappears. So you actually know what's happened to her. And then you're with Nicole starting 2 weeks later when she returns to the town to look for her mother. So the chapters sort of play off one another and they lead to a big finale where all is revealed.
That's a perfect elevator pitch. You've clearly done a couple of these already.
Yeah, well, yeah, for a very tall building, but yeah.
And Aimee, do you want to tell us about Good Night Beautiful?
Sure. I have not done this a lot, so let me figure this out. So Good Night Beautiful is very hard to talk about, but it's the story of a newlywed couple, Sam and Annie, who leave New York, where they met and fell in love and got married after a few months. And they moved to Sam's hometown, upstate, where his mother has just been put into a home she's suffering from dementia. And Sam is a therapist, and Annie is a bored academic. And they move into this big old house. Sam has a home office, and he doesn't know it, but unbeknownst to him, there's a vent in the ceiling, and every word of his therapy sessions can be heard from upstairs. So it's sort of, the first part of the book kind of follows this eavesdropping into his therapy sessions. He has this reputation as a heartbreaker in town. Most of his clientele are these females who are coming to kind of, get a session with the hot new therapist. And then a young woman shows up, a new patient, and something happens between them, all while it's being heard from upstairs. And then suddenly he goes missing. And so the second half of the book kind of follows his wife, Annie, trying to figure out where he went and what happened to him.
So both of your books both kind of talk about kind of missing persons. What drew y'all to those stories? Let's start with Wendy.
Wow. So it didn't start out as a missing persons book. It started out as a walk away kind of theme. It was the spark happened actually a moment in my life when I was on a back road like that and had a really bad day and on top of a really bad year, and was at this gas station where I put Molly when I eventually wrote it. And I had this flash of a thought I saw this road and I just had a flash of a thought to walk down the road. And it was, I feel like it's the same kind of thought you have when you're frustrated with your phone, and there's this thought like you're going to chuck it at the wall, or you just want to, you know what I mean? And we've all had, right, a thought like that. And but I was very curious because I'd never had a thought that had been that sort of random and caused by emotional like stress in my life. And so I did some research and discovered that most missing people end up having walked away from their lives, and they eventually come back. But the other piece of research I found so interesting was this emotional hijacking that occurs when we want to chuck our phone at a wall or when we want to walk away from our lives. And it's just a matter of how much emotional pain we're actually in, and how much of our rational brain we have available to come in and sort of talk us down. And so it started that way. So I thought, okay, she walks away, but now I write thrillers. So if I wrote romance or something else, it could have been a totally different story. She could have met, George Clooney on the side of the road, and it would have been, a different book. But something had to happen. So the most obvious thing would be for her to disappear. So that's how it turned into a missing person case. I put her on a road walking away from her life in the middle of a storm. And I didn't want her to die. So, and have it be like a whodunit. So she became a missing person.
And how about you, Aimee?
And can I just say something about Wendy's book? So when I was reading it, whenever I was like to get an advanced reading copy. And I remember there was like one day where I was like so absorbed, and then I took a nap, which I don't really get to do that often. I have 2 little kids, and I woke up and the house was empty. And I was like, that's fine. They just like went for a hike or something. And so I called my husband. It was a while. And then I called my husband, and his phone like rang from the kitchen counter. And I was like, I think because I was reading Wendy's book, I was like really freaked out. And I like got in the car and like drove to the lake. And I was like, where are they? And I couldn't, and then eventually he was like, we went for a hike. I forgot my phone. And I was like, her book is so like, it's so hard. Like in the best way, it's like this escape that is really kind of claustrophobic and like scary, but in a way that, even now I think would feel sort of, I don't know, like it's walk into the darkness that you can control during these dark times and stuff. But anyway, it's really good. Her book is very good. So missing person, I don't know. It was, in my book, it's a man who goes missing, a husband. And so I think a lot of what I was trying to do with this book, it is to kind of like look at the difference between what happens like when a guy goes missing and when a woman goes missing. And, and to explore like when a woman goes missing, it's like, it's often because like something happened tragic. And when a guy goes missing, it's like, well, he found something better, right? Like something younger or something prettier. And so, the book is about this guy who goes missing and this wife who's looking for him, but there's a lot underneath it. That's, a lot about like male toxicity and sort of like gender expectations and like what we kind of assume from people. And so those were the things that I wanted to explore more than like a missing persons case, but it was really fun to kind of like, to do this research into like these cases where guys have gone missing and sort of what the press is around that and what the story is around that.
So that reminds me, I was going to read this quote before I had you give the elevator pitch. So the Library Journal gave Goodnight Beautiful a starred review, and the review says, Malloy employs some of the most believable and jaw-dropping narrative twists since Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl in this smart, single-sitting read. Readers will be flipping back just to see how she performed the sleight of hand right in front of their eyes. Along with a rip-roaring suspense plot, she adds depth with critiques of gender conventions that causes readers to investigate the assumptions they bring to the text. She brings new life into the unreliable narrator thriller genre in a book everyone will be talking about.
Yeah, and I totally, wholeheartely agree. And I loved that you did that with the gender issues and just the way you constructed their marriage. And it's like it's awesome to see those elements that are, they're not totally essential to the plot, but to see them in there as character development. And it makes you stop and think and say, hey, you know what? Yeah. Like these assumptions that we make about men and women and marriage and are are, you know, really stereotypes and outdated, and they, you know, so it was really fresh in that way and unique.
Thank you. That's
Yeah,
nice.
no, I love that. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And the twists are really, and that's, it's so hard to talk about your book because the twists are, they are exactly as described. Like you do go back and you're like, what? You know, it's really fun. It's really awesome.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So talking about twists, you know, with kind of the psychological suspense genre, it's become like everybody's kind of wants to know what like the next big twist is going to shock that everybody's going to be talking about. So as writers, how do you write those twists and plot that out knowing that that's kind of what readers have been trained to look for now? Let's start with Aimee this time.
Oh, I mean, I mean, with The Perfect Mother, there was a twist at the end, and I didn't actually know that until I got to that point in the writing. Like I wasn't writing towards it. And, you know, I often think about like, and I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I was reading a lot of thrillers, but I never tried to write one before. And so it was like, I'm like, what would have happened if I hadn't kind of had that idea at the end? But with this one, I mean, Wendy knows the story, but I had this really weird experience writing this book where, when I first started writing it, it was, you know, the premise of this book is that there's a newlywed couple and they move to the country and he opens a therapy practice and his wife is listening from upstairs into his sessions and she becomes obsessed with it and he doesn't know. And, you know, she kind of like, she's bored. And so she becomes really involved in the life of like his patients and what she's learning from what's happening downstairs and also getting to know her husband more. And, you know, it was, I sold the book to HarperCollins, my publisher, on 100 pages. And they said, okay, you have a year to write this. And it was like 3 weeks before the book was due, that I just felt like I didn't want to write this book. I didn't want to publish the book that I was writing, because it did feel a little rote to me. Like it was like, you know, this woman who was like completely crazy and we didn't know if we could believe her. And, you know, and like Me Too was happening at the time. And there was something about kind of portraying another woman as this like sort of desperate, you know, drug-addled, like somebody whose words couldn't be believed, that just was sitting really wrong with me. And so I had this idea that sparked that was like the same premise of the book, but every character was different. And, you know, like eventually it'll be fun to talk about the book with people who have read it because then we can, you know, talk about the spoilers in it, but it kind of reimagined it. And so I had to go back to the publisher. First I had to call my agent and say like, what happens like hypothetically if like you sell the book and then it's due in a couple of weeks and you decide that you want to throw it away and like write an entirely different book. And, you know, and then we had to sit down with the publisher a couple of days later and my editor was amazing and Harper was amazing. And they all gave me another year to kind of try this out. You know, that was with these new characters and stuff. So I don't know, I wasn't trying to kind of write to this twist, but I think like it was about kind of, I think it's fun and like really manipulative. So maybe I'm more twisted than I think, but like to set people up to really, to have them to play with like what their expectations are and the decisions that they've made about the characters. And then to kind of flip that in a way that forces them to look at their own biases. You know, whether it's like gender or race or, you know, like socioeconomic status, and then to kind of like really force people to look at it in that way, in a way that, you know, I think could be a little bit like super confusing, but also maybe like a little uncomfortable. So, but yeah, it's hard because everybody's at this point is trained to look for the twist. So it's, you know, like I try not to do that when I'm reading. I just try and be with it so that you can enjoy it. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, look, when I approach a book, it's like this book started with this premise and I just ended up writing two reliable narrators that you end up rooting for. And there is a twist at the end, which very similar. It's so hard to talk about without spoiling it, but I was really struggling with what to do with one piece of it. And I knew what the most natural ending piece, it was a small piece of the ending, what it should be, what it most likely would be, and for similar reasons, I just couldn't do it. I was like, I just, it was a female character, and it's just something I didn't want to do. And so I decided not to. And it took a lot of, sort of rejiggling the plot and some of the threads throughout it, not the primary ending or the primary plot, but the same type of thing. But I think it's interesting because as I've, now I'm like looking down the barrel of my next project, and like I have to write another book. And it's so interesting, the different, I've thought very hard about all the books that I've read this year in my genre. And yes, there are the twists that are built on our assumptions of sometimes just timeline, like that this book is being told in a linear way. And there's no subheading on each chapter saying 6 years ago or 3 years ago. So you're reading one narrator just telling you a story, and you assume it's linear. And then bam, you find out that this whole thread happened years ago. And that's the twist. And it's based on your assumptions. There's some assumptions as well that all of the characters in the different narrations are different, unless they have the same name and the same voice. That's another assumption that readers make. And that's another way you can use that to give them a twist, by having it be a character who has a different name because maybe she changed her identity, or maybe it's her 20 years ago when she was called by a nickname, and then you find out it's the same person. So there are like all these mechanisms you can use, and then all the assumptions with, like Aimee was saying. And I think it does become challenging, because as they get done more and more, and you want to be fresh, you want to bring something new, and you want your reader to have that thrill. And so, yeah, I actually do make sort of a note of my plots and what kind of twist I can bring, and whether it's going to be an assumption-based twist or whether it's going to just be a plot reveal, and really what's driving, the story, what kind of book is it. But it's really hard. And I think the good thing though is that the genre is starting to expand. So it's not just now you have to have a tricky twist, or you have to have, a mind-blowing moment like Gone Girl, but you can have just a story that propels you through and that you enjoy and has suspense. But yeah, it's a challenge. Every book's a challenge. Like,
and there's the added, I guess, stress of like, you want the twist to feel like it's earned. Like I read something earlier this year that I won't say what it was, and like the twist came so far out of left field. I was so angry. I was like, I don't know that I would read another book from this author, because I was like, where did this twist come from? This made no sense. So, so I love those ones where it's like, you get to the twist and you're like, oh my God, I didn't see this. But then you think about it and you're like, well, of course I did, because it was this, and this.
Yeah.
So Aimee, you mentioned that you don't read to find out twist when you're reading. How about you, Wendy? If you're reading for pleasure, are you trying to figure out twist, or are you just kind of along for the ride?
Oh, I'm always trying to figure out the twist. Like, I don't obsess about it, but I'm in a curious way. Because if I'm reading a book that is in, squarely in my genre, and it's something I'm blurbing, and then I'll look for it. But if it's just something I'm reading purely for pleasure outside of my, my sort of wheelhouse, then I'm not looking for anything. I don't really know what even to look for. So yeah, it's a different experience.
And so Aimee, do you read within the genre or outside of it, or kind of all over the place?
It's funny. I was just going to ask Wendy that. Outside of like being asked to blurb things, I have not been reading thrillers at all. I just picked up Sally Rooney, and I'm like completely obsessed. And I just got like Emma Cline's short stories. And so I think I'm really sort of drawn to these, what would you call them? Quieter writers right now. And so I don't know. What about you, Wendy? Do you read within it?
I have been reading, yes. And I've been mostly reading I would say the last year solidly for friends, just that I'm doing events with. I do so many events with other authors, and just to be able to endorse them or to give an official blurb. And that takes up pretty much all of my reading time. But I do have some friends like in historical fiction, and so I'll read their books, and it's like it's really nice to see a different story and a different narration and just a different pace even, right? Like you said, a quieter story, a story that's just not based on, on this sort of twist or a crime. It's great.
Yeah, I have to say, like, since it's very hard to have libraries closed, like for me, it's been really hard because, that's, I feel like, where you're allowed to experiment with what you're reading. And I live in kind of a rural community, and we have a library here is now open full time. It's like in a town of 951 people. And I live in a bigger town and it's not open, but we kind of were driving by, this library is open for browsing. And it's like, I'm so excited. Like, it's changed my life. Like, we went today, like we were there 3 days ago, and I just got what is it? Something Freedom. It's the Meghan Markle book about like her, like her and Harry's break from the royal family, which, like, no offense to the author, but I wouldn't buy that book right now. But like, when I saw it on the shelf, I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And like, it's just been like this really wonderful thing to just like have this book that I would never buy and be reading about Meghan Markle and her, like, how she had hired all these like PR people before she met Harry. And it's so fun to kind of to have this freedom of reading, and it makes you just like see the importance of libraries, really, because you can't do that, and like, anyway, so it's been nice to, like, now I'm reading, like, I got Hoax by Brian Stetler too, the nonfiction book. Sorry. And which is great. So I'm doing a lot of, I'm finding like nonfiction to be quite comforting right now as well.
Is that me? I'm sorry, guys.
I don't know how to turn that off. I'm like,
oh, no, don't worry. It happens all the time. Don't even worry about it. I was just making sure it wasn't one of mine. I think it's, I probably should do that. I feel like I'm turning more to binge watching types of shows I haven't watched before. And then.
Are you watching The Vow?
No, is that good?
John, you watching this? This is this Netflix.
No,
or what is it? It's HBO. It's like the documentary about Nexium, that like sex cult outside of Albany.
Oh my gosh! I need to watch that.
You have to watch it. It's it could be better, but it's like but what's interesting about it is that HBO is releasing it once a week. They're not releasing.
Oh, you can't binge it.
No, it's like old days. And I really find myself I don't even like it that much, but I'm like really excited for Sunday nights because it's like something new to watch.
Wow. So I actually almost wrote a novel about that sex cult.
Oh,
I think it's got to be the same one. How many could there be in upstate New York?
No, that's it. It's like they were branded, and like he's like this weird like David Foster Wallace like volleyball guy. Like he's like, it's like very he's yeah, watch it.
Excellent.
It's been really interesting to see kind of what people have been gravitating towards, kind of with everything going on, like what comfort reads are. Like for me, I used to be a big urban fantasy reader and had just kind of moved away from the genre for a while. And as things started closing down and I was having a hard time focusing, we were doing an event with an urban fantasy author that I realized I was like 4 books behind. So I just like binged those 4 books in the series and kind of rekindled my love for that. Or we're seeing so many people are kind of going back to like Agatha Christie and all those kind of classic comfort mystery things. For like weeks, we were like, every phone call was like, what Agatha Christie's do you have? And we couldn't keep them on the shelf.
Yeah, it's it is interesting. Like, I mean, even though I feel like the book that I'm releasing is really creepy, and now I'm telling people not to read creepy books, but I'm very drawn to these like young authors who are exploring like the minutia of relationships, and and it's like there's something really like. I've been drawn to that last year. Like, yes, because like the writing is very beautiful, but I don't know. Have you guys read these? Like, have you read Sally Rooney? I'm like completely. Like,
I haven't. I mean, I'm familiar obviously with her, but
I'm very taken by this right now. It's like it's like, it's poetic, and I think that's where I don't know. I think I'm like trying to play around with that myself a little bit for my next book, like doing something completely different.
And I think that this having an emotional connection to characters is really what people are looking for. Either that, or really like the Agatha Christie is just a mental escape. Like, okay, I'm going to like, it's almost like doing a Rubik's Cube. And the responses that I've been getting to Don't Look for Me, and I'm sure you'll, when your book is finally out, Aimee, you're going to be getting a ton of reader comments that are going to be very similar, just that enjoying the depth of the characters and the attachment to the characters and rooting for the characters, or just the curiosity about them, but having well-drawn characters that have enough depth that the reader can really escape. Because I think it takes an extra pull to force us to stop worrying and thinking and, sort of taking care. There's so much to take care of in our homes. It seems endless. And to sit down and immerse yourself in a book is really, I think it's hard to do. I'm always thinking, what else could I be doing, to sort of make things better in my home for my kids, or, to work on my own career, or just, I don't know, there's a sense of anxiety, I think that a lot of us have. So it's been an interesting shift, the different tastes that are forming.
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, how has being able to kind of write and create content with all of this going on, how has that been for y'all? Let's start with Wendy.
So I wrote this. It's been interesting. When all my kids moved home, two were off in college. They moved home in March, and I started waking up, with anxiety at like 4 o'clock in the morning, which I still do. I actually was just talking about that on another panel, and it's just my mind can only rest for so long, and then I wake up with this. It was just anxiety, underlying anxiety from what's going on in the world, and I decided to stop fighting it, and I wanted to write this character, and she had been on my mind, and I didn't care about format, I didn't care about twists and turns, I didn't care about my genre, and I just wrote this story. And I would write it from like 4 or 5 in the morning until my kids woke up, like 10, 11, because they're teenage boys. And then I would make them breakfast until I taught them how to make breakfast. That was like goal number 1. There's nothing like a pandemic to see where you failed as a parent. I'm like, you guys can't cook? You can't like do your own laundry? Like, I just assumed when you went to college, you would figure that out. And they're like, well, there's takeout, there's laundry service. Oh no. So actually that's been the silver lining, has been this extra time with my boys and having like life skills classes. And now they all do their laundry. And even my son, who's still at home in high school, he makes his breakfast. He's really self-sufficient. Anyway, but I wrote this novel, and it was like, I wrote it in 4 weeks. I have to take it out and look at it. I'm afraid to do that.
You wrote a novel in 4 weeks?
I wrote a novel in 4 weeks, from 4 in the morning till 11 every single day. It was like what kept me sane. I wrote for maybe 5 to 11 or 5 to 10, but anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, like in the early morning. And then I would go have a nap. I'd make my boys breakfast, and then I would go have like a nap and wake up whenever, I woke up, usually like an hour or something. But that's what I'm saying. I don't know what's in it. I have to go and look at it. It could be crazy, could be totally crazy, but I was obsessed with it, and I remember being obsessed with it. But then I had to start promoting my paperback, and then I wrote an Audible original over the summer, which is like 20,000 words. And then now I've been promoting this book. So I'm like on the cusp of having to pull this thing out and see what's in it, and I'm a little scared. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to be in this book, if I'm going to have to start a whole new project. I don't feel like calm and creative, and like I'm, the ideas
really?
the ideas are not flowing. I'm like, really, it's been, still, that anxiety is just still there. And how about you, Aimee? Are you?
Well, it's funny because this book, like we moved in the, like towards the end of it, like we my husband and I had been in New York for like 20 years, and we ended up moving like to a small town far away. And, you know, so it was like this really hectic time. And I was like, it was writing this book like nearly killed me. It was just like really hard for me. And it was like, it's a lot about trauma, and it's a lot about, you know, I feel like it's a lot about like, I feel like the male, like toxic culture that has created the society of today. And so it was a lot, I don't know, it was like pretty heavy to write. And then, but it was like done on March 1st. And so like every weekend, like that I was working out like on the time, my husband and I would like, you know, we had this handoff with the kids thing. And we were both like March 1st, like I'm turning the book in, it's done. And I had this whole plan where I was like, I'm going to just read, and I'm going to sleep, and I'm going to like set up this house that we just bought, you know. And it was like, my kids are going to be gone out of the house at school, and my husband's going to be at work, you know, just March 1st. I have to get to March 1st. And then like, you know, 10 days later, we have a pandemic. So I haven't really like slept since then. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. But in some ways I have to say, I'm almost afraid to say this, but I'm writing in a very different way, which is like this, I have an idea that I'm starting to fall in love with like a lot, but I'm not worried about it. Like I may write this book. I may never write this book. It may take me a year. It may take me 20. And I'm just like, I'm not writing it linearly. I know where it's going, but it's really like about getting to know these characters, which is not how I've written before. Like I've been so plot focused. And so, which is probably why I'm drawn to these like sort of quiet character books, which my editor probably would hate to hear, but you know, it's like, so I don't know, in some ways it's nice because I feel like there's a freedom, because everything has been blown up, that it's like nothing exists anymore. Like the idea of going out and selling a book to your publisher, or, you know, even promoting this book or having this book come out, like there's just this like cognitive dissonance around it all. And I'm trying to, at least when it comes to like the creative aspect of myself, is to just like really embrace it and be like, I'm just going to write the way that I used to write in my journal. And I kind of think, I'm hoping it's going to make my writing better, but well, I mean, we'll see. You know, it might not make my like storytelling better, but I don't know. I'm trying to embrace it. My kids are also not in school. Like we're, you know, our school hasn't opened and my kids are little. So there's not much time.
Yeah, no, and I really can't imagine even though I had them all home, they, you know, yes, cooking and laundry and all that kind of stuff, but they're, you know, they don't need to be watched and entertained and all that. So I can't imagine, but I will read anything that you write. So
same.
Right away. And whenever it comes out, I will gladly buy a copy and read it, because your writing is already
wonderful. I will give you a copy. I will send you a free copy.
Okay. But I think it's you know, one of the questions that I'm asked a lot is if the next book will include any kind of reference to the world we're living in now in terms of COVID. And I don't plan on doing that. It's such an interesting question, but I think unless I decided to write about this time period, and it was specifically, that was part of the plot and necessary to the plot, I don't think I would write a book where, you know, I describe people on the street wearing masks. I don't see myself doing that, but have you even considered?
I mean, I think it's such a tricky question of how do you deal with this as a fiction writer? And I mean, the way I'm dealing with it is setting the book right before it, you know, so you don't have to deal with it. But I remember feeling this way when Donald Trump got elected. Like it was such a shift in what I felt like, you know, what the world was and what we had all believed, that I remember I had like tried to like write an essay about this, which nobody wanted to buy, but it was, you know, what do you do? Because I was writing in the midst of writing The Perfect Mother at the time. And I was like, how do you deal with this? And, you know, and I put the question out to a lot of writers and said, like, what are you doing about your works in progress? Like, do you feel like it's shifted the world? And I remember one woman said, like, I realized that my main character, I mean, I don't know if I can say all this, but whatever. But like, I realized my main character would have voted for Donald Trump, and I don't know how to deal with this character anymore. Like, it was so jarring. And so, you know, and I remember it at the time, and this is, I mean, somebody, you know, I kind of look at, I don't know, did you guys read like Netherland by Joseph O'Neill? Was this book about September 11th? I mean, sort of about September 11th, that came out 10 years after September 11th. And, you know, in his hands, he's such a like gifted writer, but it was, you know, it was this beautiful kind of reflection of a man's life, like the effect of September 11th on him. And I kind of feel like that's what should happen, is that in 10 years from now, there will be like, you know, I don't know who it would be who will like tell this kind of story about this time. And in the meantime, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's somebody should write this essay. Like, how do you deal with this as a fiction writer? How do you deal with it with a work in progress?
Well, I know when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I was so devastated that night. And it was, I think the book had just come out, and I had all these events planned, and I had been so obsessed with just, you know, being on social media and just really trying to promote the book and talking about the book as if it was like, you know, necessary to your survival. Like, if you don't buy my book, you could die. Like, you have to buy this book, you know, like that's how you get so passionate about your book and your characters and all your research. And then something like that happens. And, you know, I was an attorney in my prior life, and I volunteered at the ACLU, and I had been to the Supreme Court. I actually saw her on the bench three different times. And I saw her one year when she was the only woman on the bench in 2006. And and just knowing the implications of it, just for everything, it really shook me. And I actually was texting like my family and my friends, like, should I cancel my tour? Like, I don't think I can go on Zoom and talk about my book. It's like, and a friend sent me the funniest GIF, which Aimee, I'll send you. You will love it. But it's there's an actor on the bottom, and he's like, and there's like an inferno, and it's like a big action scene, and then the bubble coming out of his head is, I know the world's on fire, but does anybody want to buy a book? It's just like some writer like made this GIF, and it's so perfect. I'll send it to you. And it was like, yeah, that's kind of what we're having to do. And not just in selling our books, but now in writing our books. Like, should we all be writing about this time period? Because it is so transformative, and it is so jarring for so many of us. COVID, whatever your politics are, even just COVID, so many people dying. Or do we just write our stories and provide the escape and the entertainment that people are seeking and wanting and needing, during these times? And, you think about like World War II, and you think all that was the great escape, was to go to the movies. And I think that, I don't know, it's a really tricky question. And throughout the next day, luckily I didn't have any events that day, but I went back on social media, and everyone was paying tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it was wonderful. And then it's just, everybody started getting back to their ordinary lives, and they started posting again about their kids and their dogs and their this and their that and their books and their work and their stuff. And I don't know if that's the way it should be, if we should all be staying in the moment longer. But yeah, it's a tough question.
And it's tricky because we still don't, kind of like you said, we still don't know kind of what this is going to mean, when it's going to end. Like, we're still kind of in the middle of it. So to address that in fiction is tricky. We've heard, because we've talked with lots of authors about this, and we've heard everything from, somebody said, well, we think we're just going to see a lot of books that are set in 2019 and a whole lot of stuff that's set in 2021. And then maybe 2020, it's just like this big gap in the fiction world. We had one person say that they had a book that was supposed to be set kind of March 2020, and then like a past storyline. So it was like a 15-year thing. So we just shifted the whole thing like a year, so he would not have to deal with it. But yeah, I mean, at some point we're going to, be reading books where like people are going to the store in masks, and like, also, are we ready to read that? Are we still too traumatized by being in the middle of it that's something that we want to address? One of the comments says, no, we read you to escape. So people are weighing in that they are not ready for it just yet.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
writing to escape too. I mean, to escape in your characters and your fictional characters and this other life that you're this other world you get to create in your books.
So before you guys started doing thrillers, I know, Aimee, we mentioned nearby that you had written a couple of, you'd written some nonfiction. And for Wendy, before you started doing thrillers, your earlier books were kind of a little bit more general fiction. What caused you guys to shift into wanting to do thrillers? Let's start with Aimee.
Well, for me, it was, I don't know, actually. So I had been a nonfiction writer for 15 years. So I had, I was a ghostwriter. So I did a lot of books for famous people that, I wrote the book and then they put their name on it and said that they wrote it, which is a very weird thing that happens in publishing that we should talk about more because it's bizarre. And then, I did a couple of books. Then I wrote this biography of this woman named Malloy, who lives in Senegal, West Africa, who was, she's this phenomenal woman who moved to Senegal when she was in the Peace Corps when she was younger. And then she ended up starting these schools for girls and women who don't typically go to school in Senegal. And long story short, but her whole educational philosophy was to teach them about women's rights and human rights before literacy and math. And what ended up happening is that genital cutting is a popular practice there. And after these women went to school and they learned about women's rights, they started to declare an end to the practice. And it has grown into this huge movement, like not just in Senegal, but across West Africa, where thousands of communities of women have stood up and declared an end to cutting their girls. And it was just, I loved the story and stuff. And it was really, unlike my ghostwriting projects that were really collaborative, like it was still collaborative, but it was mine. And then I always wanted to write fiction. And I felt like these years of nonfiction had like been my education. And I don't know, I literally had two kids pretty close together, and I had stopped reading because, I was taking care of these two little kids, and really was gone girl. Like, it's so cliche, but like I picked up that book sort of reluctantly because I didn't read a lot of thrillers. And I was just like, I love that book so much. I think it's so smart. Like, and it kind of like, it sort of opened up what is possible with suspenseful writing. And it was enough that I was like, I want to give this a go. And I want to see if I could try and tell a story with that is as suspenseful as that. So, I think the interesting, Wendy, what you were saying about like the book that you wrote that's quieter, I don't know. I think this idea that there's genre writers or like that you're a thriller writer is something that I would like to kind of get rid of a little bit, even though like, I think that and Wendy and I were talking about this the other day, but there's these expectations where there's a lot of women who are writing these thrillers, and then it's expected that they keep writing these thrillers and they write them very quickly. And it's like a book a year, and you're always like, having to like produce that. So that's not what it's, I don't know. I think that the thriller genre, I think you have to be a very good writer to do that, because you have to be able to like propel a book forward. And so I just think, I don't know, I would love to like I know Wendy was saying that she has a book that's not super thrillery. Like I would love to read that, to see like what you do with that.
Yeah, it's really I don't even know what it is. Like it's just a story about a girl in a really impoverished town who witnesses a murder, and it's but there's no giant twist. I think it's suspenseful. I don't know. I have to take it out and look at it. But yeah, I started writing. Actually, the first attempt for me at writing, and I was not a writer. I was a lawyer, and I had taken time off to be with my first child who was born. We'd moved out to the suburbs, and I just couldn't, the volunteer work, and I wanted to do I couldn't just fundraise for, it wasn't what I like to do. I'm not good at it. And so I sort of asked myself what I wanted to try to experiment with that could possibly be a career that would be more child friendly. And writing a book is what came to my mind. So I think it must have always been in me that I wanted to write, or tell stories at least. And so the first thing I did was write a legal thriller because I was a lawyer and that's what I read. I love John Grisham and all that whole genre. And so I did what I do now. I took my favorite legal thrillers and I tried to teach myself like how they're structured, how to tell a story. And I wrote this entire novel. It took, in between naps. I mean, it took me like three plus years, maybe more. And then I found a writing professor to read it because I knew it wasn't reading like a novel. And I'll never forget this. So he called to tell me, and this was before the internet. This was before you could find paid editors. This was, 20 years ago, or I guess 18 years ago by the time I finished it. And he was like, you're really like, the story is so good. It's so complex and all the legal stuff. And it's really well constructed because I was able to learn that from watching how other people did it. But the piece that I couldn't learn was how to use narration and dialogue and all the tools that writers use to write fiction. So I was doing the most ridiculously novice things that I won't even repeat because it's so embarrassing. But when he told me these basic things and he really gave me a crash course in how to use these basic tools, I knew right then that I needed more tools if I was going to write fiction. And so I rewrote that novel, got an agent. And by then I was so immersed in suburban culture and I was so like aware of all of the dynamics in my suburban culture where most of the women are at home and the men were working. And most of the women had gone to college and had careers and yet now had become completely financially dependent on their husbands. And so there was a great fear of losing their husbands, and their husbands were the power. There was like a power shift. And it's just what happens in this community because to make enough money to live in these towns, somebody has to work 24/7 and have a big job. If you don't have that big job and you can't keep up because you're doing half the housework, you're not gonna be able to live in that community. So it just perpetuates. So I became obsessed with these issues and I wrote 2 general fiction books that were based on these concepts and these issues. And they got published, but they didn't sell. So then I went back to practicing law. I almost gave up writing. And long story short, I found a new agent many years later after I'd been practicing family law. And she saw a darkness in my writing that she felt would lend itself to psychological thrillers. And just like you were saying, Aimee, Gone Girl, like that book opened up this whole, and again, it just called it genre, but it's sort of like the Gone Girl genre. It's the unreliable narrator. It's the anything goes. It's the tricky twist. It's the, assumptions turned on their head and too bad if you thought that it's really this. And you made the assumption as the reader. And like, just being able to do that was so like liberating, I think, for so many writers. And you just saw an explosion, right, in this kind of storytelling. And I caught the wave of that with All Is Not Forgotten. And writing that book was like, I felt like I'd been let out of like writer's jail because I could just be this crazy psychiatrist, this man that I really dislike actually as a person, but I understand him so deeply. And to be in his head every day and write him and be so devious was like so much fun. So that's how the shift happened. Yeah, it was kind of, so I credit my agent for seeing the dark creepiness in me that I could write in this genre. So
yeah, the Gone Girl phenomenon, it's kind of curious because I don't feel like now, like Gillian Flynn in that book kind of get the credit that it deserves just because with everything being compared to it, because unreliable narrators, psychological suspense, a lot of stuff, like for a while, like every blurb that came out had like, oh, it's the next Gone Girl or something like that. So I think its impact got watered down because of that. But I mean, if you just look at kind of what an explosion that had on the industry, I mean, you could compare it to like the Hunger Games in YA, where Hunger Games came out and then all of a sudden there was this whole like desire for these books that weren't there before. We were huge Gillian Flynn fans before Gone Girl came out. She came to sign Gone Girl and we ordered like 60 copies of it for the event. And we were so like, I mean, by the event, we were like out and could have sold like 400 times more of that. We still kick ourselves for that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I do think that book is, I don't know, it's seminal, right? It's like, and you know, there hasn't been anything like it since, in any genre that I'm, you know, it was kind of like, there was like Hunger Games, there was the Twilight stuff, you know, there was weirdly like that, what is the one with the dirty one?
Oh, the 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, that one. Like, right? So there were these like.
Is that not sitting by your bedside table, Aimee?
You know, but like, I feel like what she did was, is just, it's, I don't know. You know, and then Girl on the Train was similar, because I think
I love that too, yeah.
That book too. And I feel like a lot of people, like it wasn't, I don't know, like I'm more curious about that one. Why did that one do so well? Because I feel like there's been so many, every book is kind of trying to be that. Like, nobody's going to be Gone Girl, because nobody's as smart as Gillian Flynn is. But, you know, like, there's so many Girl on the Trains, but I don't know, what was it about that book that made that one kind of like have that kind of sales? I think she sold more than Gone Girl even.
Yeah, I think it was the door that got opened by Gone Girl, and you know, when
the first
Bridget Jones started the chick lit wave, and a lot of authors charged right through that door and probably, you know, surpassed.
And then if you look at Bridget Jones, did you read The Girl's Guide to Hunting and Fishing?
No, is that good?
Yeah, it's so good, but I feel like it was so long ago, but I feel like that was the one that kind of made Bridget Jones like possible, because
like nudged the door open and then she just came right through it. Yeah, and I think that sometimes happens, and you know, but that's entertainment, and it's I'm thankful for both of those books and authors for opening up this you know, this hunger really for these books, because I love to write them. And you know, now, you know, to pivot and to shift and follow other interests and notice when something's been saturated, I think that's okay as well. You know, you hone your skills. I consider like getting more tools in my toolbox. Like, every time I read a book, I'm like, oh, there's a new tool. Like, so that I like the way that author did that. Like, that's kind of cool. You know, a different way of telling the story. So yeah, I think, you know, it's evolving, but readers, when you pick up a book, unless you're really just open to a whole new experience, but if you pick up a book and you're really wanting, like, if you're wanting an Agatha Christie moment and the book doesn't give it to you, it's really disappointing. And I think it almost blocks the reader from enjoying whatever it is that book it is in itself. It's like going to an amusement park and you buy the ticket for the roller coaster and you end up on the Gravitron, and then you get off and puke, you know, because you've gone around in circles. And you're like, okay, I really just wanted to go on the roller coaster. That's what I was in the mood for. So I feel as though there's, you know, a lot of it is just setting expectations. What is it? How are you describing this book? How are you, you know, what are you presenting to the reader? What is the reader wanting? And there are some books that are just general fiction and you don't know what you're going to get. It's like a box of chocolates, right? And you're like, I don't know where this story is going to go. And some people want that, and some people want their Agatha Christie, and they're going to be really upset if they end up with Gone Girl or something else. So I don't know. It's like a mix of pleasing your audience and being creative and trying to do both. I mean, we are providing entertainment, right? We are providing a product that we want someone to pay money to buy or to go to the library and go out of their way and spend 6 hours with. So I feel an obligation to my readers to give them an experience they want, but also, you know, I don't want to live in a box either. So I don't know. I think we all struggle with that, right? I mean, you know.
So my last question before I turn y'all loose for the evening, kind of actually, that was the perfect segue into it. So you guys have both done, Aimee, this is your second novel. Wendy, you're several novels in, but they're both standalones. What do you think your books have in common? Like, what makes them an Aimee Malloy book or a Wendy Walker book?
You go first. Scared to go.
They're all just like totally brilliant.
That's a totally acceptable answer. That's perfect.
They are, yes.
They're all just like perfectly written and plotted, and no. I mean, I think that I think I like to like I think I like to like screw with people's heads. Are we talking about my books? No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, you know, I don't know. I think that there's something about this idea of leading people down a path and then like, you know, sort of pulling the rug out from them that for some reason I kind of find really enjoyable. You know, in this kind of like, it's sort of the part of me that likes to do like, you know, puzzles and stuff like that, like to put those together. So I think that that's with these two books, like, you know, my nonfiction books are like totally different, but I think so far with my fiction, you know, it's this idea of like these big elements of surprise.
Yeah, and I feel as though I've had two books that were very psychologically driven, and they're all, I mean, maybe that's the one thing I guess that I feel is in all of my books is an examination of some kind of psychological condition or phenomenon that happens. And so the first book dealt with memory science and the impact of altering a memory after a traumatic sexual assault occurred. And the second one dealt with a narcissistic mother and how that ran through the family and the daughters. And then the night before dealt with, you know, a woman she's on a date, but the backstory for her has to do with attachment disorders and always being attracted to the wrong men and not being able to read people properly. And then this book has the walkaway theme, and it also deals with guilt and grief. I did a lot of research into that. So that's one thing I think that my books always have is a really strong psychological theme that I try to do a lot of research in, and I try to make as realistic as possible, so that you know, just gives life to that human condition.
And so I have a Publishers Weekly review for Don't Look For Me. I wanted to share a review for both. So Publishers Weekly gave Don't Look For Me a starred review, and they said, exemplary, distinctive, well-developed characters complement the skillfully paced plot. This moving look at the bond between a mother and her children reinforces Walker's place at the top of the genre. So thank you both so much for joining us this evening. If you guys caught if you're watching and you caught the chat late, once we're done, Facebook will archive it, so you'll be able to watch it there. If you want to share it, if you have people that potentially aren't on Facebook that want to watch, we will be uploading it to the store's YouTube channel in the next couple of days so people can enjoy it that way. Wendy's book, Don't Look For Me, is out now. We've got copies at the store. Aimee's book, Goodnight Beautiful, comes out October 13th. So you still have time to pre-order it. We dropped a link in the comments where you can order either of them from us. We are still Monday through Saturday, we're at the store 10 to 6. We're doing curbside pickup Mondays through Thursdays, and then Fridays and Saturdays we are open for appointments. So you can book those at murderbooks.com. I also wanted to mention briefly before we head out that we will be doing a Zoom event with Lisa Jewell in conversation with Ruth Ware that we're really excited about. That's going to be on October 15th. So you guys should definitely check that out. But thank you both for joining us this evening. This was a really great chat. Hopefully we'll get to do this again at the store at some point.
Yes.
That's great.
Take care.
Thanks so much.